Hello and welcome to my podcast. My guest today is my friend and colleague from MIT, Emily Mu. A few weeks ago, I made a video about how I landed one of the best paid trading internships working for the hedge fund called D. Sean Company. Emily worked for the same hedge fund as I, but is a quantitative analyst. We're going to make a comparison in a few minutes. Also, Emily won many math competitions in high school and she's a hobby stand-up comedian. Enjoy the conversation. So thank you, Emily, so much for being here.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm very happy to have you on my podcast. I always have very interesting guests here, so I thought like sooner or later I definitely have to have you on the podcast.
I feel very honored.
So there are a lot of really interesting things that I want to talk about, but so let's actually say how we know each other first. So 2 weeks ago I had Sachi Jain here on the podcast. I think you know her, right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, we actually met at her party, or maybe you know one of her roommates.
I do. I know one of her roommates better.
Oh, yeah,
yes,
yeah.
We met at her party, I think last semester in October or something.
It was the Halloween party, yeah.
Yes, the Halloween party.
Oh yeah, and it was actually my first Halloween in the US, so I didn't actually know how this works. So I kind of Googled it and I figured out that everybody's like super serious about dressing up.
Yes.
So it was like a night before, so I quickly ordered something from Amazon. The only thing that would arrive on time was this monk costume, like medieval. You remember that? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I had just left to the party, but then I was like, no, it doesn't look like me. So I went back and cut out all the sleeves, so it'd be like a gym bro monk.
I remember that too.
Yeah.
I don't remember habits looking like that, but you know, okay.
Yes. I wish I had a picture of it. Actually, if I have one, I'm gonna blend it in, but I'm not sure if I can find one. So it was a very fun party.
That was really, yes.
And yeah, I mean, you're a super interesting person. Then we stayed in contact, and that's also then how I invited you to this podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's start at the beginning. Like, you're originally from Chicago, right?
Yes, I'm originally from Chicago, or I'm from a suburb outside of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and then I've lived there my whole life, and I came to MIT for undergrad, did my master's here, and then now I'm doing my PhD. Same as you. So.
Oh yeah. Well, it's a nice place to be here.
Yeah. It's fun. I like Boston.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised that you stayed like for the whole time. I mean, MIT is such an amazing place to be at.
Yes, definitely.
And so tell me, how did you, in high school or even before that, get interested like in research, science, and computer science and all these things?
Yeah, so I was a math kid growing up, so I did like a lot of math contests and things like that. And I actually didn't really learn how to code until my last year of high school.
No.
Yeah, so knew absolutely nothing about coding, even though both my parents are software engineers. But my parents would always be like, "It's in your blood." And I don't think it works that way, but
yes,
that's okay.
I think so too.
And so I came to MIT. I was a course 6-3, which is computer science.
Mm-hmm.
And then I applied to grad school kind of super last minute. So I always thought I was going to go into quantitative research. And so I did internships every summer. Like my last internship I did at DU Shaw actually.
Oh, during your undergrads, right?
During my undergrad, yeah. And then my senior year I was also doing my master's at the same time, in the same lab that I'm at now with Professor John Guttag. And so I think I really liked that experience, and I think speaking with the grad student I was working with and with John, they automatically assumed I would be applying. So I was like, oh, I guess if you're willing to write me a rec, I guess I'll just apply anyway.
Oh, that's so cool.
So I applied very last minute, and I think for me, that was kind of when I decided that I wanted to at least try research and get more research skills before probably going back into industry. So. Nice.
Yeah. And the high school competitions, so I saw you went to some math competitions, but also some physics competitions, right?
I did, yes. Yeah, so I did the United States Math Olympiad, Physics Olympiad, that track of things. But
is that the also qualification for the International Physics Math Olympiad?
Yes, I did not make it that far.
It's kind of hard in the US with over 300,000 people.
Yes, yeah. But so it's the step before, which is the test that you give to all the high school students. But,
oh, nice. So how did you like it? How did you prepare for all of these things?
Lots of studying. There's lots of I think especially in my home community, there's a lot of math competitions are a very big presence, and so there's lots of training camps and materials and things that you go to. Every summer I went to math camp when I was a kid, and so yeah. So it's very...
So you got exposed to this very early?
Yes, yeah, very much.
And
so.
you liked math all the way through? It didn't make you dislike it at some point?
It didn't make me dislike. I mean, I feel like once I started college, I was still a math major, so I was also course 18, but I definitely didn't do like all the competitive math stopped, and so it's not. I was probably, I don't know, my mental math was probably fastest in high school, to be completely honest. So.
You know, it's the same thing for me. I mean, I also went to all these math, physics, Olympiads, etc.
Yeah.
Actually, I went only to the International Physics Olympiad and like the state's math
that's
Olympiad.
Awesome.
Yeah.
For what country?
For Croatia at that time, yeah. But you know what's interesting? I also think like I was so much smarter in high school.
Yeah, at least faster.
Yeah.
Like I probably didn't know as much, but I was definitely faster and like I was quicker.
Yeah, so I feel like my intelligence peaked kind of last year high school, first year college. Then I could just calculate anything in my head like this.
Yeah.
Nowadays I'm like staring at things and like have to write down everything.
No, I
divide to
agree.
integers with a calculator and that stuff, you know?
Yeah. I joke with my friends, I'm like, I have one brain cell left in grad school and I just need to take care of it until I graduate. So,
but yeah, I sometimes, and I don't know if you would agree with that, I feel like all these like science competitions, math competitions in high school, they're like really intellectually challenging in some way. They're like, you know, work hard but for your brain in some way. You get really smart at calculating stuff. Then at university, I mean, things are still hard, but not in that like challenging way, but more in a way that you just have to know a lot of things, know how to apply certain tools to certain problems.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Yeah, I think like a lot of like the math competitions and science contests in high school is something it's like you train your brain to solve puzzles very quickly, versus I feel like in college it's more like learning how to learn things, I guess.
Yeah.
And like seeing whether or not you can regurgitate them when you take exams.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
You know, this is actually a very interesting topic, but I'm going to certainly make like a whole video at some point about this. But you know, I made one video about the Shaw, the internship and like the interview process, and I mentioned, and I told people, you know, it's like very important that you're very good at, you know, probability and like have a good mathematical intuition. Like, okay, knowing how to calculate things in your head, it's fine. It's good practice, but in the end, you just need to be very intuitive with numbers.
Yeah.
So a lot of people asked me if I could make a video about how do you get intuition for mathematics. Like, how did you develop your mathematical intuition? Is there any trick?
Honestly, I think a lot of it is just practice.
Yeah.
And I think it's like once you learn how to be creative, I think like you're able, like once you, I think a base part of it is just gaining enough skills and then applying those skills creatively in novel problems. Because I don't think like for quantitative interviews, I feel like there's not that many different topics that you have to actually know, right? Like it's like correlation, like ordinary least squares, regression type stuff, and like just kind of like what happens if you like translate different variables in different ways. And there's sometimes like geometry problems and like projection and stuff. And so, but I feel like it's like it's not super difficult math, you know, it's not like super advanced number theory. It's just more about like how can you apply this limited set of things very creatively kind of in the real world. So
that's true. Yeah. That's true. And I also think that all these super fancy tools that I learned during university, I'm not that good at applying them actually as I am with the tools that I learned in high school.
No, I agree. I feel like because those were kind of like unless I feel like it's one of those things, if you don't use it, you kind of like lose it a little bit. And so the good thing about math contests is that, and like physics contests and things, is that made you use them constantly. So it's much harder to forget once it's kind of like rote memory.
Oh yeah.
So.
But I mean, that's really fascinating. And so a lot of practice, I mean, do you think that like most people can, with a lot of practice, develop intuition, or is it something that people are just born with?
I think people can learn intuition. I feel like it's more like, I think like the reason why I was good at math in high school, part of it was also definitely the fact that you do it from a young age, right? I feel like it's kind of like how like people do sports from a young age almost. It's like you like train yourself. It's to like learn a skill set and like build on that skill set. And I feel like kind of, I don't know, I feel like there's like lots of problems with the American education system, but I feel like it's often like you learn a new topic every year and it's really hard to like build upon the old things. So I think contests kind of allow you to explore that creative side of mathematics more. So
yeah, for sure.
I think a lot of it is just, like I think for example, like coming into MIT, like I knew a lot of people already from kind of the math contest world, if that makes sense, when I was an undergrad. But I feel like I know also, I have a bunch of friends who are from like lower income areas and like didn't do math contests kind of growing up. And I feel like they're obviously super intelligent, right? And like very qualified, and some of them are at the best grad schools and like in the US. But I think they had a hard time. Like I was talking to a friend who grew up in like a lower income area of Georgia, and he was telling me that he took the AMC for the first time, or like this is like the process.
But what is the AMC?
Oh, sorry. So it's like the American Math Contest.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And then you take that test. It's like a whole sequence of tests to get into IMO for us, because there's just like in every step it's like narrower. There's like a cutoff. But he took like the initial test once, and he actually got like a pretty good score, but it wasn't like good enough to qualify him for the next round. And so he just assumed he was bad at it, even though like everyone he was competing with has been doing this since eighth grade, you know? So I feel like it's a very, I don't know, it's hard. I think a lot of it is the fact that like if you work at it and train at it, it's often like, I think that's kind of why it's very hard to compete sometimes.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see all the different countries in the world, how they handle these math competitions. Many countries, including the US, I feel like a lot of people don't even know about them, just because their high school wasn't into that.
Yeah, that's true.
I grew up in Croatia, where everything is based on competitions in some way. So every school, no matter how rich or poor, they all have, you know, a school competition for every single course they offer.
Wow.
Then they have, you know, like a city district competition, then like for the whole state, and then for the country.
Yeah, for every subject, like math, physics.
Basically, every major subject has some kind of competition. Yeah. Which is, I think it's a really cool system, because a lot of people, like, I was so bored in school, and I didn't even have good grades. I just thought that I don't get these things.
Yeah.
But it was really just that I was not motivated, and that some of the things were just not challenging in some way.
Yeah.
But then the moment I started going into competitions, that was just my like kind of breakthrough in some way.
Yeah. No, I think it is very motivating to compete, I think, rather than just...
It is definitely. So. Yeah. Moving on, okay, we graduated high school, I think roughly the same time.
Yes, I think so.
And then, so you started MIT.
Yes.
Can you tell us about this whole experience? How did you like it?
The whole undergrad experience.
Everything in like a few minutes.
I don't know if you ever hung out with undergrads. I think it's like, it's both similar and different to the grad school experience, where I feel like in grad school, like even though it's still very social and there's still like house parties, like that we went to and that, but I think when you're an undergrad, you really get to, like MIT is very unique because we have a really strong undergrad culture. Like every dorm is very like close, and every living group within every dorm in particular has its own different culture and different mascots, and I think that's very different from most schools in a large sense. Where like with the people that I lived with, like over the pandemic, there was like 7 generations of people who lived in my particular living group, and we would like often Zoom call and stuff. And so I think that's something that's really unique. Also, I think the fact that everyone is an engineer, like I forget sometimes that there's schools where not everyone does science.
Like Harvard next door.
Yeah, exactly. Or I was like talking to a grad student from Yale, and he was like, yeah, computer science is a minority when I was an undergrad. And I was like,
really?
Minority? It's like 50%.
Yes, it's half of us here.
So it's honestly, I think that's something that's pretty unique. Where I think my favorite part when I visited campus, I remember when I was like browsing colleges and stuff, is that I think MIT students in general tend to be very honest. I picked MIT because, okay, so this is like but I remember I was talking to people about like, you know, like what college should I choose and stuff. And when I came to MIT, what they told me was that everyone's miserable, but we're miserable together. And then when I went to Stanford, they're like, we're all happy here. I was like, they're lying. There's no way that everyone's happy.
Well, you know, nice weather all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
It boosts your mood.
But I was like, you know, I'm going to go to school where everyone's brutally honest. I'd rather be miserable together. So I think that's like a very good summary of kind of the culture, where it's definitely very like work hard, play hard.
So it's miserable. You should join.
It's a
You're doing great advertisement here.
But I think it's like it's very like you put 100% of yourself into everything that you do, which is really, and everyone is so interesting, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the best parts about MIT.
The people are really the main thing here for me.
Yeah, we also we're on the list of top party schools in the U.S. as well, because when you're an undergrad, a lot of students from like BU and Emerson, Wellesley, Harvard, they all come to MIT frat parties and stuff.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, they do.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I wasn't even aware of that.
Really? Molly Obama came to several.
Oh, really?
That's yeah.
You met Molly Obama?
No, they actually shut down that party because it got too crazy.
Oh.
But I could have.
You know, I actually once met her at Harvard.
Really?
Like, didn't meet her, but it was like that's like a very funny story. So the pandemic had just started.
Yeah.
And that was the day when they said, okay, guys, last chance to get into your office, grab your monitors, your desks, whatever you want, get it out and bring it to your home so you can work for the next year or whatever.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was like just before midnight, because at midnight they would lock everything. I was like wearing a dark hoodie, it was like winter, going into my office, it just got my screen and a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
Basically looked like some kind of criminal, you know, stealing stuff from Harvard. And then I was like walking through the yard, and then suddenly, you know, I was like going very quickly, it looked very serious, and suddenly like almost ran into some girl. And I think I really scared her, but I'm like 95% certain that it was Molly Obama.
Oh my God.
She got really, like she saw me and then she just turned around and went in another direction. I didn't mean to scare her, but yeah, that did happen.
No, wow, I've seen Jeff Bezos on campus.
I just wanted to mention Jeff Bezos' son is here.
Yes, his son is here. His son, I think, is graduating this year because he's the same year as my little sister.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, he comes and visits his son, so that's
yeah. Also, the Croatian president, her daughter is at Harvard.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's also very fun. So she also often comes there.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I randomly saw a selfie on her Instagram profile, and then I'm like, oh, that's like next to where I live.
Yeah. No, it's cool. It's like, huh.
It's a very typical thing for Harvard and MIT. Yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. Which is really, it's fun. Also, like the Marvel universe, a lot of it happens at MIT and Harvard as well. They were filming for Black Panther 2 earlier this year. Did you not?
Yes, there was something happening. Like they were actually filming it on MIT, right?
They were. They actually, so I live in an undergrad dorm as a graduate resident advisor, and they were filming like right across the street from me. So like the whole parking lot was closed because it was all actors' trailers and stuff.
Oh, wow.
But yeah.
Yeah, I didn't see them somehow. Or I saw some trucks around, but I never actually saw like the scene where they were filming.
I feel like they like blocked off the area where they were actually filming.
Kind of makes sense, yeah.
But I saw like the other things around it.
Oh yeah. I also wanted to talk about your internships. So you did some really cool internships. You worked for Google and then the coolest hedge fund on this planet.
Oh, of course. Coolest hedge fund on the planet.
So you want to talk a bit about Google and how you liked it?
Yeah, for sure. So I was a software engineer at Google. So I actually worked on a research-esque team. It's called Ad Thresholds. So basically, there's 2 buildings in Google dedicated, or like there's this whole area of Google dedicated just to advertising, because advertising is the only thing that really makes Google a lot of money. Actually, the first day I started my internship, I sat down and my mentor was like, our team makes 86% of Google's revenue at the time. And I was like,
no
wow,
pressure.
Okay, so we cannot fail. But basically, like what Ad Thresholds does is that we take all of these variables that are collected by other teams at Google about ads. So for example, things like how many people click on it, like click-through rate, how long people stay on a page when they like see an ad. And like there's a bunch of other variables that like kind of go into this. And then they do ad ranking. So our team was the one who basically like decides who sees what ad. Like if you go to Google and you search something, you like it does the ad ranking. So there's like a lot of auction theory in there too, right? Because like you're prioritizing like 2 things that you're optimizing for. One is obviously like which advertiser pays you more money, and like you need to be able to give them their money's worth.
Yeah, exactly.
But also obviously like if your consumers hate the ads they're seeing, then that's really bad for like our company model. They're not going to come visit again, right? And so it's kind of a balance of the 2, which is really interesting.
It's very complicated, yeah.
Yeah, and so I was working on kind of making this model more fine-grained towards kind of individual demographics. So it's basically like, for example, like you might want to show someone who's like 80 and like lives in a rural area some different ads than someone who's like young and lives in New York City, you know.
I'm just thinking like Trump ads and Clinton ads or something.
Yeah.
In this case, yeah.
But it's really interesting because you would think that like this is something that machine learning is really good at because like Google has so many machines and like, you know, like the top research teams in the world. But it's interesting, at least when I was doing it in 2017, there was no machine learning at all. It's individually tuned parameters that they're selecting.
Are you serious?
No, I'm completely serious. That's like optimized for. And the reason why they do that is because like of explainability, where like they can't have their ads engine fail. Where like there's been machine learning methods that were used in A/B testing, but the algorithm that was pushed, right, like to like the majority of Google users, it's like literally this linear equation of fine-tuned parameters and like variables that kind of compute ad
Is that
quality.
still the case?
I don't know. I'm not privy to that information anymore, but as of me leaving in 2017, they weren't planning on changing it back then. So, yeah.
And were you located in the headquarters in Googleplex?
I was, yeah. I
Cool.
was in Mountain View, which is, it's a beautiful, beautiful complex.
It's very nice there, yeah.
My building itself had a rock climbing wall, a dance studio, 2 gyms.
Oh, really?
And a bowling alley, I think. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to Googleplex, well, only once. I probably didn't see that building because I can't remember that. I was like in where they do like the hardware.
Oh, no, yeah, that's like on the other side of campus from us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in, so there's this area called Crit, it's all ads. And they have lots of events because they want to keep people who do ads happy.
Yeah, because they make all the money, yeah.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. It's interesting because my advisor, my mentor that summer, used to be on like a peer research team. And I was talking to her and I was like, why did you move to ads? Like she had her PhD, everything. And she was like, well, I was tired of my teams being disbanded when like things didn't work and they were never going to disband ads. So I was like, this is stable.
It is stable, yeah. I mean, Google is an amazing company to work for.
Yeah.
I even considered like working on the hardware part, but then for some reason, what did I do? For some reason, I didn't end up doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
you worked for D. Shaw instead.
I worked for D. Shaw instead. Yeah, the best hedge fund in the world. That's actually a good topic I wanted to talk about. So I already made one video specifically about D. Shaw. So I was in the London office, which has like 25 people. And just 2 interns per summer.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if they grew in the meantime, but I was in theory like a trader, but then I became like a quant trader or something like in between.
Yeah.
But you joined the headquarters in New York, right, as a quant intern?
So I was a quant intern. So actually, it's interesting because at D. Shaw, all the quant interns and like software interns, like we're all called hybrids. The idea is that you work like between quant and software, somewhere in the middle, because everyone codes. But I worked in the quant equities team. So I think that's like 25 people per team. There's quant equities, quant options, and quant futures. And there was 4 interns on my team. So.
Okay, and the structure is then probably some senior vice president and then some other people in like all the coders, or how does it work?
So I think for the quant teams, every like quant options, quant futures, and quant equities each have an MD, and that reports directly to one of like the top 4 people.
I see.
So yeah, and then obviously there's like some interior management in between, but it's pretty flat hierarchy actually.
It is, yeah. I mean, I often met the board members.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so I think the manager of quant equities reported directly to the board member from what I remember.
Yeah, so in New York there are like the 3 board members, one for quant, one is she's in charge of HR, I think.
Yes.
And then there's another person who is, I think he's a trader.
Yeah, we're on different floors from the traders actually. So there's a floor that's just quantitative.
Yeah, I remember that,
and so the trading floor is a lot more, it's a lot louder. Actually,
I
this
love
is really
that trading
funny.
floor.
Yeah, so they have like in D. Shaw, they have on the trading floor, they have these like muffling machines. So like
muffling machines?
Yeah, so it's like this like noise machine that like kind of muffles, like so because people are shouting at each other all the time.
Oh yeah, we were shouting at each other. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, so they have this like muffling machine, so it's like easier to talk to other people that are near you. And that muffles like louder noises on the floor and stuff. But the quant floor is the only floor that doesn't have that. In the New York office.
I remember every time
quiet.
I went, I don't know which floor it was, it up or down from the trading floor? I think it's down, right? Like it would go from the trading floor down, I would suddenly it would feel almost spooky that it's
yeah,
so quiet.
It's like a church. It's
like a church, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a trading floor. I mean, the one in New York is even louder than the one in London because it's smaller.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like news blasting out of speakers and like all the corners.
There's screens everywhere.
I love that so much.
It's really, I think it's a very different working environment for sure.
Yeah.
There's like days like when I would be working where I would just have my headphones on the whole time and you almost don't talk to anyone. But I think it's just the nature of the work is a little bit different.
Yeah, so it's not like Wolf of Wall Street. It's like more researchy in some way.
Yeah, it is more researchy. It's definitely more researchy. It's still, I think in some ways it's like more nerdy. It's very.
Most of the people there are like physicists, actually, even people with PhDs or like former professors who joined the Shaw.
We actually calculated on the quant equities team when we were like talking once at a group dinner. The average number of MIT degrees on my team was greater than 1.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's crazy.
It was like greater than, which is crazy. It was like 1.25 to 1.5.
I mean, so what I noticed when I went to New York, so I only had like there was one other intern in London.
Yeah.
So they flew me like, I think 2 times at least to New York. And I think almost all the interns there were Harvard, Stanford, MIT, those 3 universities.
Definitely, I think the greatest representation was MIT for sure.
Yeah.
We definitely had a bunch of Harvard and Stanford. We had one Yale intern who worked in the law office that I remember. But yeah, it's very,
yeah.
I think we like calculate, it's like 30 to 50% 30% of interns my summer was from MIT. So definitely a very strong presence.
That's really cool, yeah. I think when I was there, I was literally the only one from like an unknown university. I was at the University of Zagreb at that time in Croatia.
That's awesome. Yeah.
But it was a cool experience, yeah. So I was there in 2016, actually. I think you were there 2 years later.
I was there in 2018 summer. Yeah. Yes, 2 years later.
2 years later. I don't know how much changed in the meantime. Obviously, I haven't really been in contact with these people. But I mean, yeah, it's an amazing company.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about the interview process? So I already spoke in the video about like the trading interview.
Yeah.
But how is it like to interview for a quant? Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I can talk a little bit about quant interviews in general because those are the interviews I'm most familiar with. But essentially, so there's usually like one coding question just to make sure that like you can code.
Yeah.
But they tend to be quite long from what I remember. So usually for like an internship, they usually give you around 5 to 6 interviews. It's a whole day on site. The structure is really dependent on the company, but usually it's like you'll talk with one person for an hour, and that person will either ask you about, they tend to do 2 things. So they ask you about a project that you've worked on, and they'll also give you a technical question. And I think our technical questions might be a little different from traders in that we don't really get asked anything about finance. To be honest, going into DShaw, I almost knew nothing about finance.
Me neither.
And so, but I've like spoken to other traders, and they get like asked some more finance-specific questions. But for us, it's more like so there's I guess 3 different types of questions that I would break things down into. So the first is kind of like standard derivation questions, where it's like I've been asked to derive like ordinary least squares very many times over, and like what happens if you change some variables and stuff like that. There's also kind of like more creative mathematical probability questions. So a lot of like the coin flipping questions, like what happens if you have like a large group of people, like kind of like large numbers type stuff, and like how many people do you have to pick to get like near an average or something. And then there's also kind of what I would call kind of like more creative questions. And so like one question that I got once was like, imagine that you have access to like all Google searches or something. Like how would you try to like use this information in order to get like some better understanding of like, I don't know, just, I don't remember what their specific example was, but it was something like market value of like products or something like that. Or like, I remember another one was like, let's imagine you have some access to data for like houses, like, or like, and you're a real estate agent, like how would you price houses and stuff? So like stuff like that. So it's more about, I guess those are kind of more like machine learning directed questions, but like more like very creative type, like how would you construct how would you start using information?
Did you have to code these things or just tell them
like
what you would do?
very high level, yeah.
Okay.
But like I think it's like you tell them what to do, and then you get to the point where you like write down the data that you have, and you like write like a basic modeling algorithm.
Oh, I see. Well,
so
it's actually quite similar to trading, just maybe a bit less, you know, a bit more of the questions like how would you solve a problem like computationally?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think, a lot of it is definitely mathematical, though. It feels a lot like math contests.
Math contests, yeah.
So, yeah.
But how much coding do you need to know?
How much coding did I? You should definitely be able to code. I think, though, quant interviews are a lot less coding than finance, or like than software engineering interviews.
Yeah.
So I only was ever asked like one coding question maximum per quantitative interview, either internship or full-time. And usually it's something that's, I remember the questions not being super like clever or anything.
Yeah.
It's usually like, it's all in Python, and it's, or like I think they also offer Java if you want to do that. But like, essentially it's basically just like I remember one of them was like about a queue or something. Like you have like some weather data, like how do you figure out? It was more like, do you know how to do this, or do you not know how to code?
Yeah, okay. So I mean, for most of these things, basically all you need is like some for loops, if statements.
Exactly.
You don't need to know anything
advanced. It wasn't
advanced.
very complicated.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Okay. And also, and I don't know if you agree with that, but I feel like all the quant people, so they're really like scientists basically. They're very down to earth, knowledgeable about science because often they have like a PhD in physics or whatever. Traders are a completely different type of people. So super nice.
Yeah.
But I remember
traders are crazy.
They're but yeah, but in some way, you know,
Yeah.
like I mean, they're pretty cool people. You know, I had a lot of fun during these interviews. I remember one of the interviews, the guy was like really high up in DSH. Actually, he came in and he asked me like where you're from. And I said Croatia, and was like, "Oh, your president, she's like really hot." He said that during an interview.
Yes, that has never happened in any of my interviews.
Wouldn't expect that.
I think the quant stereotype is that they're more nerdy, they're more antisocial, they're all like PhDs, they all just keep to their own selves and like get super excited about talking about math and science, which I think is like pretty fair. Versus I feel like traders are just they're a lot of fun. Let's just, I've heard many crazy trading stories where like they do crazy bets with each other and stuff.
Oh yeah, we did that all the time.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah, I worked at a quant firm before I started my PhD and after I left college for about 7 months. And I remember a lot of my old coworkers used to work at like places like DRW and stuff, and they were telling us stories of how like they would make crazy bets, like how many chicken nuggets someone would eat, and they placed thousands of dollars of bets on this poor man's chicken nugget eating ability, and he ended up like throwing up.
Oh no!
Yeah, just like wild, and like people are just cheering in the background. Like that's like a trading floor. That's not a quant floor. So.
That sounds really like Wolf of Wall Street, basically.
It is very Wolf. I think when people imagine Wolf of Wall Street type office, that's a trading floor. That's not a quantitative floor.
Yeah, exactly. Except the people at DSH, I don't think like all of them seemed either neutral or nice. Like they never see like DSH. Sorry, the Wolf of Wall Street folks, I mean, their job was basically selling garbage stocks to poor people and making them even poorer. DSH doesn't do these things.
No,
not at all.
Absolutely. I think DSH is actually one of the, every hedge fund has a slightly different culture, and I think DSH is one of the nicest. I think they really look for cultural fits for the workplace, which I think is really, it's a really good thing. Yeah, it's a really nice place to work. So.
I agree. Like even the trading people, in the end of the day, they were all they didn't seem, when you think about all of these people, I don't know, just being on cocaine and hookers, basically. that doesn't exist at DSH. At least to my knowledge, I don't think it exists.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, so the DSH is great. Did you ever consider like going back?
So I didn't go back. I did consider going back. I was deciding between going to DSH full time or doing my PhD. I ended up taking my PhD offer. I took 6 months off. So I went back to Chicago actually, and I worked for a hedge fund startup. It's called Aquatic LLC.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah, so basically...
Aquatic LLC.
Aquatic LLC. So essentially, like the guy John Graham, he used to run quantitative equities, or not just equities, just quant in general, like quantitative research for Citadel. He left Citadel, as people do, and decided to start his own firm. And so Aquatic was his new firm. When I joined, there's around 20-ish people, but it's a purely quant firm, so we had no traders. It was just software engineers, so it felt very tech-like in Chicago. But I think that was really interesting because I feel like when you're at D. Shaw, it's like already so big and so developed. All the data sets you work with are perfect, or not perfect, but they're very clean.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, kind of like my first project at Aquatic was going through and cleaning like tick data.
Tick data?
Tick data. Do you know what tick data is?
No.
So basically, when you have an exchange, like you register every trade that comes through.
Okay.
And that's called tick data. And so that's coming in at like the level of like millisecond, or like not even, it's like microsecond level like counting and stuff, right? And every exchange and every and kind of like every broker has their own record of like kind of what's going on. And like when you have things like residual returns, right, you have to figure out, where do I like cut off this tick? So because sometimes they'll like go in and like correct a trade, or like which is like, it actually happens like pretty often. But if you're creating 1-minute bars and creating residual returns, it's like there's like lots of small considerations. Like if the trade is corrected, but we want to do a bar snap and we're computing our features on these things, like, do we include the correction, right?
Yeah,
and like how long do we hold this window open? Things like that. So it's really interesting, and you get like, so it's like every single trade that comes through the exchange, you get information on it. So, or even if it's like a dark pool, it's like you get some level of information. So it's like, how do you work, and it's often like not very clean at all. It's like how do you start working with this
Big
thing?
mess.
Versus I feel like when you're at Shaw and stuff, like everything that's already been done ages ago, you know?
Yeah,
not
probably.
Really thinking about that, or like they gave me residual, like clean residuals, or like just match
to work
this.
with it.
Yeah, exactly. So.
And did you also like develop some algorithms like for trading, or or did you do more like research that can then be used for some trading in the future?
Yeah, I guess kind of all of those things. So I worked on like 2 or 3 different things when I was at Aquatic. So the first is like, honestly, all the researchers were also coding at some point in time. Like I think our first job was like data cleaning, data analysis.
Yeah.
So I worked on the first iteration of kind of creating residual returns, and then also started working on like the first, like the model architecture that we use to feed in these different features and like testing structure. And then later I actually worked on transaction cost analysis. So we didn't have any transaction cost analysis when I started, which is basically the idea that like after you have a trade, you get some sort of information on like how fast it was executed, like how was it executed, right? Because like brokers won't execute, usually there's like some sort of time horizon on like when you get your trade executed. And so you can like send in requests to optimize that time horizon in order to like maximize potential profit. And also, like every time you make a trade, the market reacts to your trade, right?
Yeah.
So there's like market impact factor as well in terms of like trying to better optimize when you want to like add trades into the market and like how you want to space out different purchases. It matters more if you're like a larger firm, and it depends on like, right, but and like what sort of stocks you're purchasing. But yeah, and so it was working on models for trying to basically, it's like preliminary models for better understanding how your stock purchase affects the market.
I think a lot of people fail to factor in themselves as a market factor, market mover in some way, right?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things. Like I think that's one of the biggest things about like behavioral economics is like you often forget that like the collective often, like the average is actually quite good.
Yeah, if, and you are part of the average.
And you are part of the average, yeah.
Yeah, so just to give one interesting story, in D. Shaw's early days, they actually messed up a trade really badly. So there was a company that specialized in finding treasures, quite literally. So they were like searching for some sunk ship that had like tons of gold from, I don't know, 300 years ago.
Yeah.
And their job was really just finding that. And essentially, I mean, they were publicly traded.
Yeah.
So, you know, if they find it, great. If they don't find it, a lot of lost money.
Yeah.
And essentially, so, and I don't remember the exact details. So all of these shares used to be owned by probably another hedge fund. And then, like, they couldn't find the treasure or something like that. No, sorry, this was owned by D. Shaw. But it didn't really work. They couldn't find the treasure. And at some point, D. Shaw wanted to sell all of their stuff. And the stock price was basically nothing, zero.
Oh, wow.
And then suddenly this hedge fund came along was like, oh yeah, we can buy that for you for the current market price, because they had so many shares. If they would start selling it, the price would drop so much.
Yeah, exactly.
And somehow this hedge fund came along and said like, oh yeah, we're going to buy this all at the current price.
Yeah.
Essentially avoiding D. Shaw, you know, sparing them from losing all of it.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh yeah, that's a cool thing to do. But they weren't, well, it was like a big mistake afterwards, because what they didn't think about is why would they do this?
Yeah.
So it kind of must be that they had some insider information about this.
Yeah.
And yes, the next day they sold that. Turns out that they actually had some information, and they found the treasure, whatever it was.
Oh no.
The stock price like skyrocketed 100-fold or so.
People never do some things without reason. I think that's the thing. You have to understand about the market. If someone's willing to trade with you, it's because they think they're getting a better deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or, but that's also the other thing. They want to get some kind of insurance. They want to kind of hedge a trade.
Exactly.
Which can also be the case. Although if you're buying like shares for, I don't know, a treasure searching company, I don't really see how that could be hedging any kind of trades.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I once heard a funny story of like someone I knew was like this was back when people were like trading options and futures like in college and using radios and stuff. They were trading futures of sheep. And so they actually did, like, they didn't sell their futures or something, and so they actually got its delivery of like 200 sheep to their college campus. They're like, what do I do with all these sheep?
Oh no.
So, yeah, it's pretty crazy. There's lots of like, I feel like it sounds like it was like the Wild West back then. Oh
yeah, yeah. These fun things don't really happen these days. Although one time in the show I was working with some group, they were, what were they doing? Yeah, they were like energy traders.
Yeah. And
then there was some issue. I mean, normally they just get features on, like options on some kind of crude oil or whatever. But then I don't remember the details of the story, but they had some conflict with another hedge fund or bank that they bought stuff for. And then we were joking, like, let's just get, I don't know, 20 trucks, fill them up with oil and park it on like on Fifth Avenue in New York in front of their office, like, here's the oil.
That's really funny.
Yeah, they didn't do it in the end.
Yeah. No, I think honestly, like, people will do anything for, like, I remember when I was at DSHA actually, like we were trying to decide, someone was trying to decide on the trading floor whether or not to buy Chipotle, because like queso was just about to come out. And so they had someone call every single Chipotle franchise in America and ask them if they were selling queso the next day.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which I think is so funny.
Trading in like finance is so fascinating. It's sometimes, I mean, I kind of regret leaving DSHA, not staying there.
Wow.
It was, I think it was like the happiest few months of my life.
You can always go back, right?
I could. I mean, right now I'm doing a PhD.
As we do.
As we do, as we do. Made a mistake, no, just kidding, it's fine. PhD is awesome. But yeah, it's not even about the money, it's just like such a cool, you know, you directly see what the results of what you're doing. Like with research, you spend so much time like figuring out stuff, and then, you know, maybe you discover something small and then you publish it, but then, you know, you publish it and you move on to the next thing. Like in finance, you directly see, okay, did you make money or did you not make money?
Exactly. I think it's very clean. It's very easy to analyze performance too, I think. There's like no, there's like less politics in some way, which I think is really nice.
Well, it depends on which hedge fund.
That's fair.
Speaking of politics, there was this, so Argentina, I think the government went bankrupt like a few times. And there's this very famous story, I forgot, do you maybe know the name of the hedge fund that got like in a fight with Argentina because they didn't get some money from Argentina?
I don't think so.
And they managed to convince like a few governments that they would be allowed to seize any kind of assets from Argentina, including like a government plane flying over. I think they were flying over to Germany. But then the Argentinian government had to kind of change the ownership of the plane so that their government jet couldn't be seized in Germany, because the hedge fund actually managed to pressure their way into having like the right to seize assets of Argentina. And then at some point, Argentina had like some old battleship that they parked in some African country in a port. And the hedge fund actually managed to take over that battleship.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know if they like bribed someone or they just had good connections.
Is this a US hedge fund? I don't
Sorry?
know. Which hedge? I don't know the story.
Elliott Capital.
Oh.
Yes, Elliott Capital.
Wow, I didn't know that story. That's crazy.
Yeah, I think it was like probably 20 years ago or so.
Wow.
It's funny that you could find that so quickly, but probably when you type in hedge fund seizes ship, immediately. Yeah. Oh yeah, okay, there we go. A very famous story. So yeah, I think the shop wouldn't do such things.
No, I don't think so. I've never heard anything that crazy.
I mean, it's also dangerous to get involved in such things, because as soon as you get involved in politics, there's a lot of bad people.
No, it is,
involved.
and it's dangerous internationally too, because like it's very hard. Yeah.
I mean, this guy surely didn't travel to Argentina anytime after that.
No, definitely not.
For sure not. So another thing I wanted to really talk to you about, so we've spoken about a while about finance, but let's talk about something more fun.
Okay.
You're into stand-up comedy.
Yes, yeah, I am an amateur comic.
Can I show some of your performances?
Yeah, I can send you some.
I'm going to include some clips right now.
Okay, sounds good. In elementary school, the other kids called me Math Machine. And that's because I don't think they knew the word calculator. So, reach that bit. In gym class in high school, a blonde girl thought that she was giving me a compliment when she told me that I was really pretty, so I could probably be one of those really pretty nail people when I grew up. True story. Unfortunately, I got waitlisted at Really Pretty Nail People School. So that's the real reason why I had to settle for MIT. So, thank you. I started when I was actually an undergrad. I was a senior. And I think for me, I don't know, I feel like there's so many students, it can, especially when you're an undergrad, it can be very easy not to like leave sort of this MIT bubble. And so I wanted to meet more people kind of in the general community. And so I took a stand-up class at Boston Improv, and then I started doing some open mics and stuff. And
they have classes for stand-up comedy?
They do,
That's so
actually.
cool.
Yeah, you just basically sit in a room and then you tell jokes to people and you hope that they laugh. That's what the class structure is like. But,
it sounds more fun than engineering.
It is fun.
Quite literally, yeah. And did people laugh at your jokes?
Yeah, I mean, so I've done some shows in Boston. Over the pandemic, I did a lot of remote shows and stuff. I was actually, I know someone who was hosting the longest they were trying to break the world record for the longest comedy show over Zoom.
Oh, wow.
And so I did a 5-minute set on that as well at 8 a.m. one time. So I think it's really fun because it's also, I feel like academia is a pretty small community, and I feel like comedy is also it's very similar in that you know a lot of once you know a couple of people who do comedy, you know a decent number of people in the Boston area, and so
that's so cool.
Yeah, it's really fun. I really like it.
So when did you start doing that? Just during college when you took that class?
During college, yeah. So 2019, I think. Yeah, 2019, and then I stopped for a little bit when I was working, and then I picked it back up again over the pandemic.
That's so cool.
I've been doing it pretty regularly since 2020.
Are we gonna have a little tour at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I can invite you to my next show.
Oh, yeah, it's already scheduled?
This one, I did one last week, and I haven't scheduled one since. But I feel like people who actually pursue comedy full time go to shows multiple times a week. But I don't have, especially in person, I don't have that kind of time. So
well, you have a PhD to work on.
Yeah, I'm impressed by all the things you do. So.
Oh, thank you.
I do, actually. Or I have some about math. Okay, so
I want to hear math jokes.
Oh, yeah? So basically, one of my jokes is that, so I came out to my mom when I was an undergrad. And so even though, I told her I was gay because even though sexuality is a spectrum, when you're Asian, parents only take 100%. I couldn't say I was a 5 out of 6 on the Kinsey scale because for those of you who aren't calculate, so this is a throwback, that's a B. So.
Not acceptable. Oh, that's really funny.
But I think it works better on stage sometimes.
Well, right now it's just me laughing. and I heard the joke before, so.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
Yeah, but.
Oh, that's so cool. I wish more people would do such creative things. It's really hard.
I think it's really nice, though, because it's a different form of creativity than research. Because I feel like research also requires creativity, but it's nice to go out and interact with people. And I think it's kind of there's a high when you go on stage that I really enjoy. So,
oh, that's really nice. And I mean, an interesting thing about it is being brilliant scientist doesn't give you any competitive edge in that. You have to start from scratch, basically. So it's really a challenge.
Yeah, it's very, I feel like people are oh, what do you do? And usually people do comedy, they try to do comedy usually they're trying to pursue comedy almost full time, and I'm like, oh, I'm a PhD student. They're like, really? Yeah.
But it's so cool that you can do it at the same time.
Yeah, it's been really good. I think it's good. I think everyone needs something that you're not, like, I don't think anyone can do research 100% of the time. You need something else to do and like to work on and to, yeah.
Which is also why I started this. I mean, it's kind of a creative project, having a YouTube channel.
Figuring out what people are going to laugh at and be interested in, like, it's like, and like what people can, because people only laugh if they can connect with something, you know? And so you have to make things like relatable. Like, I think that's why I don't have as many specific MIT jokes. Is because it's very hard to like.
It's a different environment, yeah. I always try being funny, but somehow people tell me that I'm not funny, so I give up on making jokes.
I'll take you to some open mics and you can practice.
Oh, I'm not sure. That would be very scary for me. Maybe it's something about my face. People say that I look very serious. Even though I consider myself to be a very silly person, but apparently I don't look like it.
I feel like the first time I saw you were dressed as a monk. So maybe that's why.
As a gym bro monk, yeah, okay. Then I didn't look very serious.
No.
With like a cross around my neck.
Yeah, and I was like, huh. He's dressing as either like a monk that just like didn't have sleeves. I don't know what's happening.
Well, a gym bro monk. Yes, that was my explanation to everyone when they asked me.
You literally made me cut the sleeves.
Yes.
He's like, I just want to show my muscles.
It's not true. It's not true. Okay, that's true.
That's so funny.
But I always think like I go to the gym so many times a week.
You might have got to show them off on Halloween as a.
Exactly. I mean, I have no time to go on beach vacations or anything like that. So what do I work out for? So at least I was like, that's my one chance. One chance. Oh yeah.
It's so funny.
Now everybody knows the truth.
I think you should keep it in.
Well, I'm going to keep it. Yeah. I usually always say like, oh yeah, I'm going to remove that because it's embarrassing, but in the end I just keep everything. Yeah. Actually, I want to ask you about your research, if you don't mind switching back to these questions.
Sorry. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think this is like a good understanding of the social side of grad school. You know, I had someone ask me earlier this week who was deciding whether or not to go to MIT. She's like, everyone apparently says that MIT grad students are super lonely and don't socialize at all. And
I'm trying to fix that.
I don't think that's true. I don't know. So I think it's good that like you can reveal that MIT, like we don't just sit in our rooms doing research all day. But so on my research, so I work in Professor John Guttag's lab. So we are the clinical and applied machine learning group. But basically what I do specifically is I do a lot of, well currently I'm doing a lot of X-ray modeling. So what that means is that so my current particular project is that when you get an X-ray taken at a hospital, often you get like the multiple views taken, right? And so you get like the frontal view, and you'll often get like a lateral view as well. So that allows you to see kind of like the back of the lung cavity that you can't see when you have just a frontal view. Yeah. And so kind of what I'm working on is a lot of current X-ray models, they only use the frontal view in order to do sort of like disease classification, segmentation, things like that. And our belief is that you can use both images, especially for some diseases like pneumonia and stuff, where you can see the lung area better using the lateral region. You can use both views in complementary ways to get a better understanding of what's happening in order to help diagnose risk, for example, for a patient. So lots of, it's like computer imaging, but more for healthcare applications. Medical images are very different from things like natural images, and like Google image search and stuff, for example. So
it's even hard to get the data in the first place.
Exactly, yeah. So a lot of it is under HIPAA regulations. So I did like a COVID X-ray project earlier. That took it took half a year just to get through the HIPAA regulations. It's very, so I think, and often the data sets tend to be a lot smaller and also less clean. Like it's much harder to get lots of like informative labels for chest X-rays, right? Because you have to speak with experts as well, and better to understand what's going on. Versus like everyone can see a picture of a bird and a dog and be like, okay, this is a bird and this is a dog. So I think there's lots of interesting challenges for medical image data that I think doesn't necessarily exist for things like natural images.
And you published a very interesting paper this year. I actually read that yesterday before the party to get myself hyped up. I read your paper.
Oh yeah, okay. My boss wanted, yeah.
That was about COVID, right?
Yes, yeah, that was the COVID project. So essentially, there's a lot of risk prediction models that use the electronic health record data. So a lot of machine learning in healthcare is basically using kind of the electronic health record to make, it's never to replace doctors, but it's often to like help predict which patients are at like low risk or high risk of deterioration. And so my work was looking at, so patients are already COVID positive, right? And so that's something, we're not diagnosing for COVID, because that can be done with a test. You don't need a machine learning model to do that. But we were trying to say, if a patient already has COVID, can we use the image of their chest x-ray as well as the electronic health record data to better understand which patients are at high and low risk of deterioration? So it's not as, like, it's not a simple question, because X-ray information is very different from like the binary variables that are available kind of in the electronic health record. You can't just stick the two together and stick it into a model. So a lot of it is like figuring out, how do I combine these different sources of information, right? Because like the X-ray has a lot more bits, but not all those bits are informative, right? So it's like, how do I get some sort of understanding of like the information that's necessary from the chest X-ray and be able to combine that with like these, basically they're all binary variables, right? We do some sort of quantization. So that was that project, and we were able to, I mean, the punchline was that we were able to identify a lot more low risk patients with a much higher accuracy for.
So what was the idea that you can also like help hospitals determine if they have overcapacity, which patients are not high enough risk, that you would keep them and rather prioritize someone who's higher risk?
Exactly, yeah. So when that work was published, and also like prior when we were working on it, was kind of when people were worried, and there was a lot of field hospitals opening up. And often there's actually a New York Times article that said that field hospitals are actually underutilized during the pandemic, mostly because people like didn't know who to send to the field hospitals, right? There just wasn't enough information, and you don't want to send someone to the field hospital. It's not like, it's just like, it's not lesser quality care, but it's like often harder to like get things like ventilated and stuff if you're at a field hospital, just because there's not as many resources that are available there. And so it's about like, so there was this huge creation of field hospitals, but this huge underutilization because people didn't know who to send. So it's kind of, I think that's kind of where like risk understanding really helps, and kind of risk prediction, because machine learning is actually really good at doing that in comparison to like doctors, because doctors are really good at diagnosing. We never want to diagnose, but I think in terms of like understanding and taking in a lot of data from previous patients and better understanding like, oh, like maybe this patient needs a little bit more extra monitoring, they have a higher chance of deterioration, is something that I think machine learning can actually add to a hospital environment.
Are these things like already used? I mean, not maybe specifically your research, but like machine learning models that like analyze like data about patients? Are they really used?
So the hard thing with deploying machine learning models in hospitals is that the same amount of regulations we have to get the data, we have to go through the same amount of regulations and studies to actually deploy the models. So oftentimes there's a lot of models that are running in the background. So I'm not sure if mine is currently running, but I know the EHR model that I built on top of, that actually is running in the background, but I don't think it's in use yet. Like I don't think doctors actually use it to make decisions, medical decisions at the moment, but oftentimes like what people will do is they'll run these models in the background for years, collect the data, and then run another study to see how well those predictions actually help patients.
That makes sense,
right? And so there's like retrospective studies on top of kind of the machine learning aspect. It's very easy to. I think the least like blocked part of this whole process is like once you get the data, like you can run so many models on it, but it's very hard to get it actually to deployment into use in hospitals.
Do you think it's also? I mean, these doctors don't understand machine learning probably, so. How do you even convince a doctor to use something, and how do you make them believe that that actually potentially does a better job than when they look at an image?
Yeah, well, I think so. A lot of, right, so there's several parts to that. Like the first is that you want to be able to take in, so we worked with a pulmonologist during like the project that I was working on in order to better understand like when we're looking at kind of the gradients of these images, does it make sense? Like, are we highlighting the right regions that actually that look like, right, like the lung area like should be the area that we're looking at essentially, right, to understand if there's like a high or low risk of deterioration. So like, are we actually seeing those when we look at kind of like the gradients of the networks that we're running? And so that's kind of like a preliminary check. I guess another thing that these models, often you try to make them as simple and as lightweight as possible. So oftentimes for like risk prediction models in healthcare, a lot of them are like very straightforward logistic regressions. And the reason why is because like you want to be able to understand which factors are contributing, right? Like if you have this like deep neural network,
you have no idea.
Yeah, you don't have enough data, you have no idea what's happening, and it's very complicated to understand like what factors are the most meaningful and the most usable. And so I think that's something that like oftentimes the models themselves we try to make them more lightweight and simpler. Also because healthcare hardware is not very advanced. That's the other thing. And I think finally another thing that a lot of people in my lab are trying to do is you take in input from doctors as well. So like how can we modify models and give more insight into like the explainability of models in order to allow for doctors to like, oh, like maybe like, so one thing is like maybe you present some of the nearest neighbors of like a particular snapshot, right? And then doctors can say, oh, you're right, like this does fit in with this category and stuff. And so like trying to find ways of providing more insight is also like kind of an active area of research as well. So yeah, but that's a very interesting question.
That's really fascinating. How did you move from like, let's say, quant stuff to like more medical applications?
I think it's very simple. So I'm more interested, like I think the application space is nice because you can actually like, it's very motivating in a sense, but I think in terms of like the actual interests, like I work more in the modeling domain, right, where it's actually an interesting computer science question. And I think that like, essentially what quant research tries to do is you're trying to understand the world, and the point is to make money, right? Like you want to understand the world in order to make predictions, in order to make money at some sort of time horizon. And I feel like, I mean, like the stuff I do now is pretty similar as well, right? Like I'm like taking in images of healthcare patients, and like I'm trying to make predictions, obvious, like with real world caveats
and for a good cause.
Yeah.
Actually improving medicine,
Yeah, and so I think I think in that sense, like the interests actually align pretty well. And honestly, computer vision is something that a lot of, when I was working at DSHA, like a lot of other intern projects on the futures team and on the options team, 2 of the quant projects were actually in satellite imagery.
Oh, wow.
Because you can actually understand how crop growth works using satellite imagery. And that was like a huge thing, right? Because you always want the next edge.
You want to know what's going to happen, how the food prices are going to develop.
Exactly. You want to the more information you have about the understanding of the world, the better predictions you're going to have, right? You know, in some sense.
What I always think about, so now these hedge funds are so smart that sometimes when I want to understand things about politics, I just look at prices of certain things, how they develop, and assume that like the average of the people who, you know, push these prices up and down are so smart that it can actually tell me something about the probability of a certain event happening. Or look at betting odds. Like I never bet for money, but I always look at betting odds just because, you know, I don't know, I want to know what is the chance of Brexit happening back in 2016.
There's like whole political marketplaces for that type of stuff. And like Trump winning and stuff, you can like watch it change. It's so
I just monitor that because like, honestly, the experts, I mean, they were like constantly saying, I think like there's a chance for this and that, but they are not even nearly as smart as actually the betting odds because they're a result of so many people, so many smart people together.
Yeah, no, I completely, I think like even in like when the 2016 election, like a lot of like, people were like, oh, why did the surveys perform so poorly? And it's because like you only survey the people who come to your news site, so it's already like a biased segment of the population. But I feel like if you look at like a marketplace, right, like it's oftentimes a lot more equal. And you can actually get a better understanding of what's happening. So.
Although sometimes they also get it wrong. I remember with Brexit, the odds against Brexit, they were estimated too high. So some traders in the show actually betted that the Brexit would happen, that the referendum would go through.
Yeah.
And I think they all made like quite a lot of money of it. Just because, I don't know, maybe it was bad weather that day or something like that, and they assumed that they overestimated some probabilities.
Yeah.
And yeah, they won a lot of money.
Oh wow!
But then Brexit happened, so I don't think they were happy.
That's really funny. I knew someone. There's one betting like pool on like this political marketplace on like how many times Trump will tweet. And someone that I used to work with wrote a Twitter bot to model how many and he actually made like $12,000 in that marketplace, and then he donated it all to the Clinton Foundation. So it was really funny.
I like that approach.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating.
It's so interesting.
So many possibilities. And where do you want to go after your PhD? What are your big plans?
Oh my gosh, where do you want to go? But I think so I'm working for Microsoft Research this summer.
Oh, cool.
In Cambridge. And so I think I'm going to see whether or not I like research and industry, and then that's going to help me figure out what I want to do after. Because I always say I want to go into industry, but like I've never tried it, so I guess
do startups.
yeah, I do. I think it would be. I really liked working in a startup, and I think it would be really cool to be able to do that. Most of my friends who graduated, a lot of them work in startups, but I feel like it's something. I would need to find something. I don't really have an idea at the moment, So.
I mean, me neither. But just the cool thing about starting a company now that I've done it myself is you're 100% in control. Before that, I thought that I have a lot of decision power and a lot of control over things in my life. But it's only once you actually start a company you realize that that you can just do something. Normally you have to ask for approval or get opinions of people, but here. You have to act quickly and just react to everything, be very smart, make smart decisions.
Yeah.
I think it was the coolest experience, probably even cooler than the Isha, like starting my own company.
Well, if you had, but maybe we can talk about it later.
Yes.
We want to do something with machine learning.
We have to find the right idea for it.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are like so many possible spaces, and there's so much potential in the machine learning. I just currently don't have the idea that would say, okay, that's worth doing.
I think I've been very skeptical about crypto, like startups and stuff, but I feel like a lot of my friends are very into it, and I'm trying to read a little bit more to try to figure out what makes it so hot, all these posters about NFTs and stuff.
Yeah, they're all around us.
Oh, crazy.
Well, I had John, John
Purifoy.
Yeah, right, you mentioned you know him. He was here in the podcast, sitting in this exact space.
He's so fun. I really like John.
He is really cool, yeah. I think people really like the podcast episode with him.
Yeah.
We started by rapping Eminem.
He's such an interesting person. He's also one of the most social people I know. Yeah, he can talk to anyone, I swear to God.
Really?
I think so.
People that he doesn't know?
Yeah, he's just extremely, he's extremely friendly.
Oh wow, I wish I had that skill or that courage to just talk to anyone.
Yeah.
I'm too shy.
I think you're pretty good at it at your party. I was talking to someone, I was like, who do you know? They're like, I don't really know. I know someone who knows someone here. I was like, I know Samuel. And he was like, who's Samuel? I was like, oh my gosh, you're like Gatsby. You're your party dog.
Oh yeah, we're back to the party topic. I still have situations where I walk around Harvard campus and random people say, hi Samuel. I'm
exactly.
Do I know you? Like, oh yeah, I was at your party. I'm like, oh, cool, yeah. And we spoke for 5 minutes oh yeah, remember definitely.
It's okay.
Oh, fun times.
It's really funny.
Fun times. So thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Yeah, thank you for
really
having
enjoyed
me.
the conversation.
This was really fun.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you're interested in more conversations like these, you can click over here or here. Also, if you haven't already watched the video about how I landed my internship at D. Shaw, you can do so over here. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel over here, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.